They framed her, laughed in her face, and thought she was gone for good, until she walked back in as their new boss. They didn't even wait for the hallway to clear. 4 uniformed officers, ones Marisol Bennett had once mentored, stormed into her office at 10:42 a.m. on a Thursday, hands already on their cuffs like they'd been rehearsing it all morning. "Marisol Bennett," one of them said, too loudly, "you're under arrest for evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and abuse of authority." No warrant, no explanation, just cold stares and a camera crew waiting outside like it was some kind of spectacle. She didn't argue, didn't scream, didn't even ask why. Instead, she looked at them, especially Officer Brent Holden, who couldn't quite hide the smirk curling at the corner of his mouth, and then stood up slowly, hands out. "Get on with it, then." They marched her through the 9th District Precinct in Eugene, Oregon, like she was a criminal. Her badge was still on her hip, her gun still in its holster. No one said a word. The front desk sergeant turned away. A rookie she had helped pass firearms training barely made eye contact. Everyone had heard the whispers. Some had even helped spread them. Marisol had spent 21 years on the force. Her record was clean. Commendations, high-profile cases, no suspensions, no questions. And yet, overnight, she had become a threat. Outside, the local media swarmed like vultures. Cameras clicked. Reporters shouted over each other. "Is it true you stole narcotics from the evidence room? Are you cooperating with the investigation?" She said nothing, just got into the cruiser. This wasn't about justice. It was a message, and she heard it loud and clear. Brent Holden slid into the back seat beside her. Not protocol, but they weren't playing by the book anymore. He leaned in, close enough for her to smell the stale coffee on his breath. "You should have kept your nose out of things, Bennett," he murmured. "Now look at you." She didn't flinch, just met his eyes. "I was never scared of the dark," she said quietly. "I just know it better than you do." He didn't reply, but the twitch in his jaw said enough. At the station, they fingerprinted her, photographed her, and locked her in a holding cell for 6 hours. Her lawyer wasn't allowed in until hour 4, deliberate. Long enough for the press to publish, long enough for the gossip to spread. By the time Kendrick Lowe, her lawyer, finally sat across from her, she was already headline material. "Your file's been sealed," he said, dropping into the metal chair. "They're saying nothing's official yet, but the whole thing stinks. Internal Affairs isn't even handling this. It came straight from the top." She exhaled slowly. "You think it's Holden?" Kendrick nodded. "Him and a few others. It's a coordinated hit. I don't know what you stepped on, but they're covering something, and they're scared you'll dig it up." She wasn't angry, wasn't panicked, just quiet. She'd suspected something for a while, files disappearing, cases being redirected without explanation, evidence logs mysteriously edited. But every time she asked questions, she was brushed off. Paranoid, they'd called her. Now they'd made it clear. Asking questions was dangerous. Being honest made her a target. And this wasn't just about her. There were victims, people whose cases were buried, whose rights were ignored because the wrong names were involved. If she was going down, she wasn't going alone. 6 hours later, she was released. No formal charges, no explanation, no apology, just a file marked pending review, and a whole station full of officers watching her like she was already guilty. She didn't say a word when she walked out of the precinct. Just made one phone call from the parking lot. Not to her family, not to the press, to the mayor. "It's time we had that conversation," she said into the phone, "and I want everything on the table." And then she disappeared. No calls, no texts, no statements. For the 9th District Precinct, that was good news. They thought they had already won. For a week, The officers carried on like nothing had happened. Brent Holden was even seen in the break room, grinning as he bit into a powdered donut. "Maybe she finally realized she wasn't one of us," he joked. Laughter followed, not because it was funny, but because people were afraid not to laugh. Captain Dwight Penley, the one who had signed off on Marisol's arrest, insisted he was just following protocol. But everyone knew better. He owed favors, big ones. His sudden rise through the ranks had never been quiet, and Marisol had been one of the few officers bold enough to ask how. Without her around, things got quieter, less tension in the air. Files stopped being questioned. Decisions weren't second-guessed. Holden and his crew, the ones who had always carried themselves like they were untouchable, grew bolder. They started clocking out early, pushing calls onto rookies. A missing report here, a botched interview there, nothing the public would notice. But Marisol would have. She had been the one to keep people honest, even when it made her unpopular. Now no one filled that role, not even close. Outside the station, though, the silence wasn't so easy to maintain. Rumors swirled. A bartender at Winston's Tavern swore he overheard 2 city clerks whispering about a quiet meeting at City Hall, something about federal involvement. Another rumor claimed Marisol had been spotted in Salem, walking into the Department of Justice building. No one could confirm it. But it was enough to make some people nervous. Detective Nina Rowe wasn't laughing with the rest. She kept her head down, focused on her cases, and stayed out of office gossip. But deep down she knew something wasn't right. One afternoon she walked back to her desk to find Holden flipping through one of her case folders. "Didn't know this was your jurisdiction," he said, eyes scanning the pages. "It's not," she replied. "But the lead witness asked for me." He looked up slowly, closing the file. "Watch yourself, Rowe. You don't want to end up like Bennett." She didn't respond, just took the file from his hands and walked away. But her stomach twisted into knots. That night, she pulled up her archived messages and reread the last one Marisol had sent her 2 days before the arrest. "If anything happens, don't trust Holden. Look deeper into the Langford case. There's more than missing drugs. Start there." The Langford case had been dismissed as a dead end, a suspected overdose, quickly ruled accidental and filed away. Marisol had always questioned the timeline. The witness statements didn't match. The evidence chain had been broken. Rowe had let it go back then. Now she wasn't so sure she should have. Meanwhile, Marisol wasn't hiding. She was planning a short-term rental in Corvallis under a different name. No paper trail, no photos, just time and space to work. A local tech firm owed her a favor. They helped her build a database, cross-referencing internal affairs records, digging through cases that had been quietly buried, reclassified, or erased altogether. What she found wasn't just negligence, it was a pattern. The same names kept appearing: Holden, Officer Kent Riddell, Sergeant Tom Avery, even Captain Penley. Excessive force, missing evidence, witness coercion, all filed under different case numbers, shuffled through layers of bureaucracy. Dozens of victims, some cases closed within hours, others simply vanished. She printed every name, every date, every complaint. Then she circled the ones that overlapped. 27. This wasn't about getting her badge back. Not anymore. This was about taking down a system that protected predators in uniform. Back at the precinct, they weren't just relaxing, they were preparing for their next celebration. And at City Hall, the mayor's office sat on the 4th floor of a nondescript government building near the riverfront, sandwiched between a bail bonds office and a dental clinic. Nothing impressive, nothing flashy. But behind its frosted glass doors, something serious was brewing. Mayor Helen Trujillo had known Marisol for years. They didn't always agree, but there was mutual respect. Helen had watched Marisol clean up an entire drug corridor on 8th Street without firing a single shot. She had seen her de-escalate violent calls with nothing but a calm voice and sharp instincts. So when Marisol called and asked for 10 minutes, Helen cleared her entire afternoon. Marisol didn't waste time. She walked in, laid a folder on Helen's desk, and met her eyes. "I need a federal inquiry into the 9th District," she said. Then she flipped the folder open. "What I'm about to show you has been happening under your nose." Helen didn't say a word for the first 5 minutes. She just flipped through the pages, names, photos, documents. One report showed a young woman with bruises along her jaw, her assault complaint stamped "No follow-up needed." Another was a body cam transcript, cut off mid-arrest with no explanation. Marisol had marked every questionable entry. Color-coded, dated, cross-checked. Helen finally exhaled, tapping a pen against the folder. "This many cases?" Marisol nodded. "And those are just the ones I could verify. There's more." Helen rubbed her temples. "How did I miss this?" "You never got the chance," Marisol said. "Most of these never made it up the chain. Reports were rerouted or blocked. Some officers used ghost logins. Internal Affairs was kept out of the loop by design." Helen stared at the evidence in front of her, then at Marisol. "You want to run the investigation?" "No," Marisol said evenly. "I want full access. The records, the audits, the archives. Give me oversight, and I'll give you a clean department." Helen leaned back in her chair. "You know what this means?" Marisol didn't hesitate. "Yeah, it means they're going to come for me again." She met Helen's gaze. "But I'm not backing off this time." 3 days later, a federal liaison was assigned. The city council held a closed-door vote. By the following week, Marisol Bennett was reinstated, not as just another officer, as Internal Affairs Commander with a temporary federal mandate to oversee officer conduct in Eugene's 9th District. No press conference, no announcement, just a signed document, a new badge, and a mission. Meanwhile, Holden and his crew were busy planning their victory lap. The charges against Marisol had been dropped, but they didn't care about the technicalities. To them, it looked like the city had chickened out. They booked a bar for Friday night, calling it a send-off to the witch hunt. Even Captain Penley showed up in jeans and a button-down, ordering pictures like it was a promotion party. Detective Nina Rowe, however, wasn't celebrating. She had spent the week pulling every file she could on the Langford case, and something didn't sit right. Officer Kent Riddell had been first on the scene. Nothing unusual about that. But there was no body cam footage submitted. Again, not unheard of. Except his camera log showed it had been active for nearly 7 minutes. The footage was never uploaded. Rowe sent a request to the tech unit for any backups. Then she did something bold. She emailed Marisol. She didn't know if it would go through, but she typed it anyway. "I believe you. There's more to Langford. I can prove it. Let me help." 20 minutes later, she got a reply. "Meet me Monday, neutral ground. Come alone. The location? An abandoned library on the east side, decommissioned 2 years ago. It was risky, but Rowe showed up early, heart racing, hands shaking. Marisol was already inside, pacing, papers in hand. When she turned and saw Rowe, she smiled, not like someone who was back for revenge, like someone who had finally found an ally worth trusting. They talked for nearly 2 hours. Rowe brought what she had, printouts, statements, timestamps. Marisol laid out the bigger picture, the map of corruption she had been piecing together for weeks. What they saw wasn't just misconduct. It was a cover-up. 7 years deep. The same day at the courthouse. Back at the precinct, Holden and his crew were still passing around donuts and cracking jokes. They weren't expecting trouble. They should have been. In the courtroom, the pre-hearing for Officer Holden's testimony was about to begin. Just a formality, a procedural step, confirming the case against Marisol had been dropped. Holden walked in smug, flanked by Captain Penley and two other officers. Detective Rowe sat at the back, watching. Then the double doors swung open, and the room fell silent. A woman strode in behind the federal liaison, straight-backed, black suit, new badge gleaming on her hip, Marisol Bennett. She didn't say a word, just walked to the judge's bench and handed over a sealed envelope. The judge skimmed the letter, adjusted his glasses, then looked over the courtroom. Let the record reflect that as of this morning, Marisol Bennett has been officially appointed as Internal Affairs Commander under federal authority, with jurisdiction over the 9th District. Murmurs rippled through the room. Captain Penley shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this wasn't shared with the department." The judge barely glanced at him. "That's because it wasn't your call." The Mayor and the DOJ are exercising emergency powers under Title 18. She's not here as a defendant. She's here to observe today's testimony and begin her review of officer conduct. Penley's mouth opened, then shut. Holden went pale. Marisol turned slowly, deliberately, her gaze sweeping across the room until it landed on the cluster of officers who had marched her out of the precinct just weeks ago. She stepped toward them, calm, steady. "Good morning," she said, her voice smooth but firm. "I look forward to working with each of you. Starting today, I oversee every internal complaint, audit and review tied to this district. I trust everyone's paperwork is in order." No one laughed. The silence that followed was thick, like the air had been sucked out of the room. Marisol didn't flinch. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. As the judge resumed the hearing, Holden sat stiffly, barely able to answer routine questions. The smugness had drained from his face. His voice cracked once. Rowe noticed his hands twitching, like he couldn't figure out where to rest them. When the session ended, Marisol walked out alone. Rowe followed. "You didn't warn me," Rowe murmured. "I couldn't." "Not until it was locked in." Rowe gave a tight nod. "They're going to panic." Marisol's lips curled slightly. "I'm counting on it. That's when people start making mistakes." Later, that afternoon, back at the precinct, the mood had shifted. Officers whispered in corners, screens went dark, phones were wiped. When Marisol walked past, Penley called an emergency meeting, trying to keep his voice steady. "This department runs on trust and discipline," he said, deliberately avoiding her gaze. "Let's remain professional and transparent during this transition." Someone in the back snorted. No one asked questions. Marisol didn't care. She had work to do. She stepped into her new office, a cramped, windowless room once used for filing overflow. 2 desks, bad lighting. She brought her own lamp, her own chair. Above her desk she taped a quote. "If they feared doing it in front of you, they knew it was wrong." By sundown, she had pulled her first 10 cases from the archives, each one marked inactive, each one involving names she'd already flagged. She made copies. Then she called Rowe. "Tomorrow," she said, "we start interviews." Across town. One officer left the precinct early, heading straight to Holden's house. Holden stood by his window, sipping from a chipped mug, watching headlights pass like they carried answers. He hadn't spoken much since the courtroom ambush, not to his wife, not to his lawyer, not even to Penley. But now someone was knocking. Officer Kent Riddell slipped inside, barely shutting the door before he whispered. She pulled the file. "Brent Langford. It's in her office now." Holden didn't move, just stared at the street. "And Rowe?" he asked. "She's helping her." Riddell swallowed hard. "They've got the old tech logs too." Holden clenched his mug so tightly a crack split down the side. "Damn it!" Riddell shifted nervously. "We got to do something." Holden exhaled through his nose. "Not yet. If we push too hard, it'll look like panic." But the sweat already glistened on his temples, trailing behind his collar. The next morning, Marisol arrived early, earlier than anyone. She parked in the side lot, walked through the back entrance and past the break room, where 3 officers quickly fell silent. Her presence had already altered the rhythm of the building. No one lounged anymore, no one laughed. Every step she took made someone flinch. She posted a list on the notice board: mandatory internal interviews. Week 1, Officer Kent Riddell, Detective Sherry Ames, Lieutenant Brian Vostek. Officer Brent Holden. Times and dates followed. Signatures required. No excuses. By 9 a.m., the station buzzed like a wasp nest someone had poked with a stick. Nobody said her name, but she could feel it in the air. The first interview was Riddell. She brought him into the office, shut the door quietly, and offered him water. He didn't take it. "Let's talk about March 12th, she said. 3 years ago, the Langford scene, your body cam was active for 7 minutes. "Where's the footage?" Riddell stammered. I don't know, it should have uploaded it. Didn't? Maybe it was a glitch. The tech guy, he was supposed to check those. Marisol leaned forward, folding her hands. "You've got one chance to tell the truth, because if I find out you were part of a cover-up, that badge won't protect you, not anymore." Riddell's eyes darted. His throat bobbed. Then, finally, he exhaled. "He was alive when I got there," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "Langford. He was breathing. I called it in. But Holden told me not to put it in the log." Marisol's jaw tightened. "Why?" Riddell shook his head. He didn't say. Riddell exhaled shakily. "He told me to keep quiet. Said the guy was a junkie, that it was already over. Then he told me to delete the clip." Marisol didn't react. She just made a note. "Are you willing to give that statement under oath?" Riddell swallowed hard. "Yes." She let him go without another word. That night, she typed up the transcript and submitted a copy to the federal liaison. It wasn't enough for arrests yet, but it was enough to put Holden on notice, and the pressure was working. Holden was unraveling. At home, he was coming apart. He wasn't eating, wasn't sleeping. He'd started calling old friends, trying to call in favors, asking about loopholes, immunity, anything that could make this go away, but it was too late for that. The cracks were showing inside the precinct too. That's when a young patrol officer, Darnell Coates, dropped off a USB in Marisol's inbox. No note. When she opened it, she found audio from 2 years ago, Holden off the record, threatening a witness. No one had ever reported it, but now it was hers. She played it on loop for nearly 10 minutes. This wasn't about gut feelings anymore. She had proof, and the pieces were falling into place faster than she expected. But just as she prepared the next round of interviews, someone inside the department decided to strike back. And not with paperwork. The warning shot. The morning started with a smashed tail light. Marisol spotted it before sunrise on her way out for coffee. The rear corner of her government-issued car had been caved in with something heavy. No note. No cameras in the back lot. Just silence. She didn't report it. Instead, she replaced the bulb herself, drove to work early, again, and reviewed her next 3 interview files. Officer Holden was scheduled for Friday. She moved him up to Wednesday. She knew it was him. The broken taillight was a message. But if he thought intimidation would work, he had no idea how deep her resolve ran. The confrontation. By 9:10 a.m., her office door swung open. Holden stepped inside, trying too hard to look casual. Polo shirt, hands in his pockets, leaning back like he had nothing to hide. "You dragged me out of my rotation for this," he said, dropping into the chair. Marisol didn't look up. You're not in rotation. You've been reassigned to administrative duties pending review, effective yesterday. The smirk flickered back onto his face. I see. So you're on a power trip now. She slid a printed transcript across the desk. This is a conversation between you and a witness, Olivia March, dated February 9th, 2021, recorded off-site. Holden didn't move. You told her to retract her statement in exchange for making a charge disappear. That ring a bell? Holden didn't touch the paper. He just shook his head, amused. You really think you're going to build something out of scraps? He scoffed. You're not a cop anymore. You're a paper pusher with a chip on her shoulder. Marisol's voice didn't rise. You don't understand what I am. She leaned forward slightly. You still think you're safe because you have people in your corner, but they're going to flip on you. It's only a matter of time. And when they do, you'll be standing alone. Holden's jaw tightened. He leaned in, eyes dark. You think you're untouchable now. You forget how easy it was to bring you down the first time. Marisol didn't blink. That was your mistake, she said. You left me breathing. A beat of silence. Then Holden stood abruptly, slamming the door behind him so hard her stack of files shuddered on the desk. The breaking point. That evening, Rowe walked into Marisol's office, dropping 2 thick manila folders onto the desk. I think we've got our smoking gun, she said. One folder was labelled Avery, the other, Penley. Sergeant Tom Avery had signed off on 6 internal memos that contradicted dispatch logs. One memo in particular showed an arrest that never happened. Fake paperwork. And Penley? His signature was on all of it. He had authorized the logs. No follow-ups, no questions asked. Rowe rubbed her forehead. They're connected. These weren't isolated incidents. They were running an internal protection loop. Certain arrests never made it to court. Certain suspects vanished. She tapped the folders. It's all here. Marisol sat back in her chair, fingers steepled against her lips. How many people knew? Rowe exhaled. At least 6, maybe more. But I bet only 3 gave the orders. They both knew exactly who the 3 were. Holden, Avery, Penley. And one by one, the others were starting to crumble. Rumours buzzed through the locker rooms like static before a storm. Riddell had lawyered up. 2 officers had called in sick, back to back. The walls were closing in and people were scrambling for air. Too late for warnings. Marisol stayed late that night, methodically printing copies of every cross-verified report and labelling each folder. She and Rowe built a timeline, tracing corruption from its earliest confirmed incident to the most recent. At 1:17 a.m., her phone lit up with a text from a blocked number. Stop digging. You're making enemies. She flipped the phone face down. Too late for warnings. She was ready to escalate everything to the DOJ. But then, something happened that threw everything off balance. A surprise no one saw coming. The attack. The call came in on Thursday morning. A civilian had been assaulted outside the 9th District precinct. Marisol was already on site, buried in archived footage, when Officer Rowe barged in, face pale. It's Riddell, she said, breathless. He's in the parking lot. He's bleeding. Says someone jumped him. Marisol didn't hesitate. She ran, down 2 flights of stairs, out into the rain-slick lot, and there he was, slumped against the concrete divider, lip split, one eye swelling shut, his torn sleeve barely hanging on. They warned me, Riddell muttered, said I should have kept my mouth shut. Marisol crouched beside him, voice steady but firm. Who was it? He shook his head. I didn't see. They wore masks, but one of them had a gold bracelet. A pause, then he whispered, Same one Avery always wears. Marisol flicked her eyes to Rowe. No words needed. By sundown, the DOJ liaison had been briefed. Assaulting a potential witness in an active federal investigation? That was bad. Doing it on department property? That tipped the scale. The response was swift. Access codes suspended, badge entries logged. The mayor, furious and cornered, greenlit a full public audit. The noose had tightened. The collapse begins. Marisol sat across from Captain Penley in the now sterile conference room, stacks of printed evidence between them. She tapped the top sheet. These are your approvals. Another tap. You vouched for fake arrests. One more. You redirected internal memos, so either you were blind or you were involved. Penley tried to puff up, but the fight had left him. You have no idea what kind of pressure this department's been under, he muttered. Budget cuts, community backlash. Sometimes you make choices to keep the wheels turning. Marisol didn't blink. You didn't keep the wheels turning. You ran over people who trusted us. Silence. Then he folded. Without much resistance, Penley agreed to step down and cooperate. Not full immunity, but a deal. A door that kept him out of prison if he gave up the rest. And Marisol? She took the statement herself. Meanwhile, Rowe worked through the night, compiling a list of everyone directly tied to the Langford case, falsified witness logs, missing footage, every thread of the cover-up. They ran on black coffee and adrenaline. By Friday morning, they were ready. The fall. The arrest warrants landed before lunch. Holden was the first. 2 federal marshals rolled up while he was mid-bite into a pastrami sandwich outside a deli. He barely fought back, just sat there, chewing slowly, like reality had only just hit. Avery wasn't so lucky. His front door was kicked in before sunrise. His wife screamed. He tried to run, didn't get far. 6 others followed in the next 24 hours. 2 patrolmen, a lieutenant, 1 forensic clerk, all tied to the cover-up web. By evening, the story broke across every major news channel. Internal corruption scandal rocks Eugene's 9th district. They used words like betrayal and systemic failure. Pundits lined up to dissect the scandal, but for Marisol, it was never about headlines. It was about this moment, standing in the hallway that Friday afternoon, watching federal agents escort officers out in cuffs, the same officers who had once dragged her out of this very building. She didn't smile, she didn't gloat, but she did walk, slowly, down the corridor, stopping just outside the squad room. The chatter inside died instantly. Marisol stepped forward, her voice even. "Some of you were part of this," she said, scanning the room. "Some of you weren't." A pause. "But every single one of you let it happen." The last word, silence. Let it stretch, let it breathe. Ignoring it only made it stronger, so Marisol let the words hang, let them sink in. "From now on, if you lie, you're out. If you cover for someone, you're gone. If you abuse the badge, you won't walk out of here with it again." Not a threat, a promise. Justice had taken root. Order was returning. But Marisol still had one last stop to make. The one person she hadn't faced yet. Face to face. She waited until the end of the day. No reporters, no entourage, just her, and a folder under her arm. She walked the quiet hallway of County Jail, past flickering fluorescent lights and humming vending machines, until she reached the holding area. "Here to see Brent Holden." The deputy on duty gave her a long look, didn't ask questions, just buzzed her in. Holden sat behind the thick glass, hands cuffed in front of him. Already he looked older, paler, the faint bruise on his jaw still visible from the takedown. His uniform was gone, orange scrubs, plastic wristband. He exhaled, shaking his head. "Didn't think you'd come?" Marisol slid into the chair across from him. "I didn't come for you." She set the folder down. "I came for the truth." He scoffed. Truth? You think any of this makes you the hero? Her voice was steady. Number, I think it makes you the warning. Holden leaned forward, cuffs clinking against the table. You think I started this? You think I was the only one? No. She didn't flinch. But you were the one who enjoyed it the most. Silence. A long, heavy pause between them. You could have kept your head down, Holden muttered. You had the respect, the record. You would have made captain. Marisol tilted her head. And let people like you keep poisoning the badge? She leaned back. No thanks. Holden looked away. No more smug remarks, no more jokes, just a man unraveling. Marisol stood, folder still in her hand. She tapped it lightly against the glass. This is every statement, every file, every name tied to what you did. I'm not holding it for revenge. I'm holding it to remind myself why I keep showing up. Her voice was calm. Because for every officer like you, there's a kid out there who still believes cops are supposed to protect them. Holden said nothing. She didn't wait for him to. She turned and walked out. Never looked back. The road ahead. Outside, the late afternoon light cut across the pavement. The silence was different now, not the kind that makes you uneasy. The kind that means something is finally over. Back at her office, Roe was waiting. 2 cups of coffee, a stack of new files. You ready for round 2? She asked. Marisol took a slow breath. Not yet. She picked up the first file. But I will be. They sat side by side, reviewing complaints from other precincts. New names, new stories. The work never stopped. But now it had meaning again. Marisol reached for a pushpin and tacked a photo of Langford to her bulletin board. Beneath it, she taped a single note. Ask the questions anyway. That evening, she drove past the city limits, just her and the open road. She thought about the victims, those whose cases were buried, whose voices were ignored. She thought about her younger self, stepping into her first uniform, proud and ready, not yet knowing how heavy silence could be. And she thought about what it meant to carry that weight with both hands. And never let it break you, because integrity isn't loud. It doesn't always win awards. It doesn't show up on the news. Sometimes it walks into a building full of enemies and still does the job. And sometimes it gets the last word. If this story hit home for you, take a second to subscribe. Stories like these matter, not just because they show what's broken, but because they remind us what's still worth fighting for.